Hey guys, Ezra here and welcome back to another Ezra review. And I guess on today's video, I want to review the first three Mission Impossible movie, in preparation for Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. And the reason why I decided to review the first three movie only is because the rest of the other movies from Ghost Protocol to Dead Reckoning, they're pretty consistent. That's what Mission Impossible are known for, where Tom Cruise performing insane stunts. But the first three movies are very different because like they're trying to find its identity, like the franchise identity, and most importantly, Ethan Hunt's identity, as a characters in the franchise, because I think people know how weird Mission Impossible 2 was, which we're gonna get into that. But yeah, that's the reason why I decided to just talk about the first three Mission Impossible movie and talk about my opinions on it, and then telling you guys my favorite moments, and obviously telling you guys like what is, I guess like ranking the first three Mission Impossible movie as well, and also of course sharing my opinions on each movie, and yeah, I think this is gonna be, for me at least, is pretty fun to rewatching the older Mission Impossible movie because it is interesting to see how the franchise started, so without further ado, let's just start to the with the first Mission Impossible movie, directed by Brian De Palma, which I think this is like the last Brian De Palma movie that was successful. And after this movie, I think Brian De Palma movies was just like flopping at the box office, which is pretty sad because I think he is a good director and he does a great job directing this movie. So obviously Tom Cruise are playing Ethan Hunt, for the first time, and I remember to see where the movie starts with an original character from the Mission Impossible TV series called Jim Phelps, played by John Voight, and this movie at the time it came out, I think was pretty controversial with the original fans of Mission Impossible TV series, because Jim Phelps, which is the original protagonist for the TV series, are the main bad guy in the first movie, and Ethan Hunt, Tom Cruise is the main characters, and I think I understand why some of the hardcore fans hated the movie, which I have no idea because I always thought that this is just a Tom Cruise most well-known franchise, which is it is, but I did not know that it was actually based on the original TV series, which I haven't watched, so I can't really say anything about that. But yeah, I think it's interesting that in the introduction of the movie itself, the movie focuses a lot on Jim Phelps' characters, and then Ethan Hunt was there in the first scene, but I think I remember where they do this like a group shot, I think, where you see all the team member was actually had a meeting with Jim, and then you see Ethan Hunt in the middle of everybody, and then the camera doesn't necessarily focus on him, which I found that to be interesting, because it feels like he just like blends in with everybody, and then eventually after the first mission failed, that's where Ethan Hunt becomes our main characters, and I also want to praise the score by Danny Elfman, which I think the Mission Impossible theme is just great. I think from all the original trilogy, Danny Elfman theme is like the best one, and it has the best opening sequence, which is also paying homage to the original TV series as well. Is fantastic, but yeah. So the mission fails. Basically the mission was they're trying to find the knock list, which is basically a list that contains many of the like undercover agents' name, but the mission fails. Everybody dies, and then except for Ethan Hunt. And I want to praise Tom Cruise's performance here, where he was actually super angry and in shock, where his team is dead, and then he decided to meet with Kittredge, played by Henry something. I can't pronounce his last name. I'm sorry, but yeah, Kittredge, which is like the leader of the IMF, I think, Impossible Mission Force, and but Tom Cruise, sorry, Ethan Hunt decided to throw like a gamma thing, which is like a bomb, the red light, green light, you know, and it was actually a bomb, and then I think Tom Cruise did a stunt in the restaurant here, where there is a bunch of like a water tank, I think, like a giant aquarium, where they basically did that for real, and Tom has to run away from the water, because if the stunt failed, I think I remember, if the stunt failed, then he possibly he could drown, in there, so yeah, I think Tom Cruise in the beginning already did like some big stunts, I guess, but obviously not as crazy as the stunts from Ghost Protocol, but I do think this is a good stunts, in the movie itself, so obviously, just like in every Mission Impossible movie ever, Ethan Hunt decided to go rogue, and then he decided to find this guy named Max, using the internet, which I think is the one thing in this movie that doesn't age really, really well, because the way they treat the internet back in the day, it's just like, oh, you can find some classified information on the internet, and which I'm just like, well, obviously back in the day, and the internet was still new, so I understand that, but that is like the one thing that did not age well in this movie, that, oh, using the internet we're gonna find the bad guy, and like that's not how it works. But either way, he decided to meet with Max, which revealed to be a woman, and we actually meet Max's daughter, the White Widow from Mission Impossible Fallout, played by Vanessa Kirby, and I think there's an interesting connection there. But yeah, basically Ethan decided to team up with Max, and then he asked for like a $10 million, for the knock list, like the actual knock list, because the knock list that they got in the first mission, apparently it was actually a decoy, So Ethan and Claire, one of the surviving team members, decided to hire Luther Stickle, and then a helicopter pilot named Frank Krieger, And obviously Luther, played by Vingrhames, is gonna be one of the characters that stays on the franchise, So basically Tom Cruise and Vingrhames is the only two actors that appears on every single Mission Impossible movie, Simon Pegg does appear in Mission Impossible 3, but not in the first two. And yeah, so they decided to go to this mission in the CIA headquarters in Langley, where they try to find the knock list, or like get the knock list, And this is actually one of the most famous sequence in the movie itself, where Tom Cruise are basically hanging down the rope, And this becomes like the most iconic imagery or scene from the franchise, because I think every single Mission Impossible movie had that moment where Ethan Hunt jumping down with a rope, and then like his hand are spreading out, But I feel like in the first movie it was an accident, where it nearly fails the mission, but it is an iconic scene, where there is no music, there is no sound, you have to be quiet, because if you are too loud, then they will basically it will trigger the alarm, and obviously the body hit as well, and the floor is basically, you cannot touch the floor because there is a sensor thing. Like it's a really intense scene, it's certainly the best scene in the movie, It's really well directed, and I think it was really intense. I love it a lot, and it's been parodied like a lot, and I can see why, but yeah. And also I want to talk about, like, it's like one of the characters that appear, named William Dunlop, played by Ralph Saxon, and I think he's gonna come back in Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, but I'm assuming that we're gonna get some similar scene in Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, where Ethan is gonna do some similar stuff, dropping by the rope, spreading out his hand, and nearly fall to his death or something like that, and then it's gonna be related to Ralph Saxon's character again, William Dunlop, which I think, okay, poor this guy, man, because I think this guy just is a CIA analyst, and he just tried to do his job, but obviously he gets fucked over by Ethan Hunt's team, and he's probably gonna get fucked over again in the Final Reckoning. I have a feeling, to be honest, because why would you brought back this one character from the first movie that actually nobody really cares about, but he's coming back in the Final Reckoning? Why? We don't know. I'm assuming Ethan Hunt is gonna mess with him again, and he's probably gonna get fired this time. Who knows? But either way, there was a good scene, and after they get the knock list, where later on Ethan realized that where the actual person who betrayed the entire team was actually Jim himself, because Jim, basically, I think Ethan thought that Jim is dead in the first mission, and it was revealed that he's actually the mole behind everything, and he decided to basically just go forward with the mission, but knowing that Jim is actually the one who behind everything. And he basically decided to deliver the list to Max, but secretly, basically, he decided to invite Kidrich and the team to the meeting, so they can arrest Max and then possibly Jim as well, proving that Ethan was actually innocent the entire time, and of course, Jim are the bad guy here. Either way, Ethan decided to I think wears Jim's mask, which also becomes the staple of the franchise. Like basically people are wearing other people's faces, or masks, and I think in the first movie, interestingly, I think the mask was actually practical, and it's kind of like interesting to watch them wearing the mask, where it's basically, okay, I'm gonna wear the mask, and then Ethan decided I'm gonna have to sit still, don't move any muscle, and just make sure that Claire, which is teaming up with, which is Jim's wife, and then make sure that Claire actually believes that I'm actually Jim, and again, the way he pulled off the mask in the train was absolutely amazing, because again, it was practical, because in the rest of the sequel, they were obviously have some CGI there, which I don't have any problem, because having a CGI basically make the actor way more, I guess, believable in a way, because in this one it's like, okay, I appreciate the practical effects of it, but at the same time, obviously, you don't know exactly how that's gonna work, because obviously you cannot exactly speak, because again, I think in the first movie they haven't introduced like I think the voice changer device, that was introduced in the second movie, but in the first movie they don't have that, just the face mask, so I'm glad that the sequel decided to expand upon that, but either way, Ethan decided to fight Jim on top of the speeding train, or like a bullet train. And then we see France coming back, and then with a helicopter, and then Ethan decided to blow up the helicopter, red light, green light. And yeah, it kills both, and it kills France and Jim, obviously, and yeah, Ethan basically completed the mission, he basically free, and I think at some point he doesn't want to do IMF job again or something like that, basically, like he's unsure about returning to the team, but on the flight home, basically a flight attendant approaches Ethan and then asking him like, hey, like, do you want to hear this music or something like that, basically introducing him to a new mission, as the team leader. And you're like, wow, okay, like I think that's a good ending, and I think this possibly the best start of the franchise, because it's the kind of movie that they're still referencing even in the later Mission Impossible movie, especially the latest one. I think they keep referencing the scene from the first movie, which I think they're going to definitely recreating it again in the Final Reckoning, and yeah, you can definitely feel the impact of the first Mission Impossible movie to the other movies in the franchise, and it's absolutely fantastic. So a fantastic start, but when there is a fantastic start, there is a fumble, which is Mission Impossible 2. Now, this movie is directed by Johnwoo, and the reason is that because Tom Cruise said that he wants every single Mission Impossible movie to have a different director, because so they can have a different style or vision, which I kind of agree, because I think that's one thing to keep the franchise a bit more different than one another, and I love that idea, until Christopher McQuarrie came in and he decided to direct the last 4 Mission Impossible movie, which I don't have any problem, because I think McQuarrie is a great director, but John Woo here is definitely, I don't know, an interesting choice, for a Mission Impossible movie, because this movie doesn't feel like a Mission Impossible movie. This movie feels like a Hong Kong John Woo movie, because obviously, and it also kind of feels like a James Bond movie, because here's the main problem with Mission Impossible 2. The main problem is Ethan Hunt's characters, besides the story and the pacing, Ethan Hunt's character is way different compared to the first movie. In the first movie, Ethan Hunt is about the mission, it's about completing the mission no matter what, and then try to look out for other people as well, and try to be tactical or smart in his approach, but in this movie his personality is different. He's kind of like James Bond, there is even a scene there in the movie itself, which I think they stole that from Golden Eye, which is a James Bond movie, and it's like, yeah, it's a clear homage, but also like, yeah, this is not Ethan Hunt, man. Ethan Hunt will never, act like this, where it's about style instead of like tactics, or being smart about the situation, and yeah, it's definitely a weird movie in the franchise itself, I think it becomes like the black sheep in the franchise, where I think even in Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning trailer, they reference every single Mission Impossible movie except Mission Impossible 2. I'm pretty sure people noticed that. I wonder why, but yeah, it's so different, from the previous Mission Impossible movie. And I feel like the pacing and the storyline is really, really weird, and it's the weakest of the Mission Impossible trilogy, and if not the whole franchise, to be honest. It is so weird. Because again, I don't even know how to describe the plot, to be honest, because I know there's a virus, they have to get a virus or something like that. And yeah, I don't know. I guess there is the bad guy played by Dougray Scott, and then also the lady played by Tanduin Newton, I think. And yeah, this movie also have a love triangle between Ethan, Sean, and Nya, which is the female characters, and it's like, okay, I don't think anybody are looking forward to you know, a love triangle plot device in Mission Impossible, you know, but here we are, I guess, you know. And this movie also has so many scenes where the characters are pulling off their mask, you know, and it's a bit excessive, man. It's a bit much, you know. I feel like you could try to do that in the beginning, you know, where I think the bad guy basically using Tom Cruise, Ethan Hunt's, you know, mask, you know, and then of course they introduced the voice changer device, you know, which I think is pretty cool. But again, there is so many scenes where the character just like taking off the mask, you know, and it's like it's just way too much for me, you know, because like, here's the thing. In the first movie, when Ethan Hunt pulled off the mask of Jim Phelps, you know, it absolutely worked, you know, because again, it works on the moment, you know. There is a specific scene where you try to build up, you know, where it's like, oh, is this Ethan Hunt or is this like the actual counter speaking, you know, like the actual person speaking, and like you never know about that, you know. And certainly it kind of got me in the Mission Impossible sequels later on, you know, where I thought that, oh, it's actually the counter in the scene are speaking, you know, like the actual counter, but no, it was revealed to be Ethan Hunt, you know. That is, but in this movie it's way too much, and it kind of like loses the effects in my opinion, you know, because I think they just saw like, oh, the first Mission Impossible movie has the scene where Ethan Hunt's, you know, taking off the mask, you know. So in the sequel, like, oh man, it's like, yeah, it's a bit much. Either way, I will say the action sequences in this movie are really cheesy, you know, but it's definitely a John Woo movies, all right, but it's not as violent as a John Woo movies, you know. And I feel like John Woo has, I don't know, I feel like John Woo at this time is kind of like, I don't know, man. It feels like he kind of loses you know, his edge, you know, for filming, you know, because like if you watch A Better Tomorrow, The Killer, Hardboiled, like there was a brutal movies, you know, because I love them, but after he moves to Hollywood, I feel like he kind of loses its styles, you know, and then he becomes a bit more friendly, you know, and I feel like I kind of feel that in Mission Impossible too, you know. But regardless, you know, finally when the movie has some action sequence, because my God, there's so many scenes where the plot point are just not interesting, you know. And yeah, finally we get to see some action sequence in the end, you know, where Ethan Hunt riding a motorcycle, driving to the fires, you know, which I think is pretty cool. Putting some sunglasses, because obviously this came after the Matrix, you know, so obviously people are gonna try to mimic the Matrix a lot, you know, at the time. And yeah, there is a scene where Ethan using a dual pistol setting, you know, which obviously is a John Woo style, you know, and there is a stunt in the movie which I think is pretty dangerous, you know, where Douglas Scott's character basically tried to stab Ethan Hunt in the eye, and then they actually use a real knife, you know, where it stabs like inches away from Tom Cruise's eyes, you know, which is like, damn, that was a cool stunt, but it's also like, do you need to do this stunt, you know, because it was really, really dangerous, you know. I don't think you need to do that, you know. But either way, I appreciate the practicality of the scene itself, you know, because Tom Cruise with Tom Cruise, you know, he wants to make everything real, you know, he wants to do real stunt, and I appreciate that, even though it was really, really dangerous, you know, because he could like, again, an inch different, guys. He's gonna get stabbed in the eye, and then Tom Cruise is gonna be blind, at least like one eye blind, you know. And oof, man. But either way, props to him for doing that stunts, you know. And we have a fight scene in the beach, you know, which I think is pretty yeah, it's a Hong Kong fight scene, pretty cool, I guess, you know. But it's also pretty ridiculous in a way, you know. Every single time Tom Cruise did like a martial arts move, like I just keep paying attention to his hair, like his flowing hair. It was just like so funny to me. It feels like he's doing a hair commercial sometimes, you know, where it's like, I'm waiting for him to just like, hey, by the way, this movie is sponsored by this shampoo right here. I don't know, it feels like his hair is so distracting. It's so funny, you know, where he's trying to be badass, you know. Because I think the fight scene itself, I think, is fine, you know. It's a Hong Kong fight scene, which is also okay. But yeah, the hair stuff is just so funny to me, you know. But yeah, I don't know, man. I think for Mission Impossible 2, it's definitely the wrong turn for the franchise, you know, where Ethan Hunt is no longer Ethan Hunt, you know. He becomes like a James Bond 2.0. The action sequences are like, okay, I mean, they're cheesy, they're John Woo style, you know, but I feel like they're not exactly Mission Impossible action sequence, you know. And Ethan Hunt's character in this movie, he becomes more of a style than, you know, tactical like in the first movie does, you know, or like the rest of the sequel, you know, where he's actually trying to assess the situation first and try to be smart about that, you know. And there's some realism in the dialogue and the characters, you know, because like Ethan Hunt is not exactly a superhero, because he always calculated his next move really, really well, you know. And it also does help where Tom Cruise does his own stunts, you know. But in this movie, it seems like Ethan Hunt is just like a superhero, you know, where there's so many crazy things happening in the action sequence, you know, which is pretty fun. But I feel like there are times where they become really, really ridiculous, you know. And of course, I also want to mention the score. because Mission Impossible 2 is actually scored by Hans Zimmer, which I think Hans Zimmer is like the greatest composer ever, you know, but I feel like in this movie, his music is actually the weakest one, you know, in my opinion. I don't remember any single theme from Mission Impossible 2, because that's just like how, I don't know, man, how disappointed this entire movie was, you know, and watching it for the first time, it's like, yeah, I understand why people did not like the second movie. I understand, because this is not Mission Impossible, man. It's just a weird term for the franchise, and they're still definitely trying to experiment with the franchise identity and with Ethan Hunt's characters, you know, and they definitely fumbled the bag here, you know. And yeah, besides Tom Cruise, I guess vingrhames again coming back as Luther, which is pretty fun, you know, but I think Luther in the first movie is actually way more like a better character compared to the sequel, at least in my opinion. And also big stars like Anthony Hopkins was in this movie. I don't know who his character was, you know. I'm assuming he's probably the IMF like commander, maybe, you know. I thought it was Kidrich in the first movie, but I think it was Anthony Hopkins in this movie. Which is like, yeah, I almost forgot that he was actually in this movie, which is really weird, you know. But yeah, I guess that's it for Mission Impossible 2 review, guys. Again, I know that I have nothing much to say about the characters and the plot, you know. I think I did say my opinions about the second movie, guys. You know, it's definitely the weakest one in the trilogy, and it's definitely the weakest one in the whole franchise. You know, it's definitely a really weird place for the franchise itself, you know. And I think, do you guys know that every single other director that directed Mission Impossible, they always asked to come back to direct a sequel, but John Woo was not asked to come back, you know, which, yeah, I wonder why, man, you know. But either way, again, I love John Woo movies, you know, but I think his style doesn't necessarily fit Mission Impossible movie, you know, because it's a really different movie, and I think John Woo should just stick to Hong Kong cinema with Chow Yun-fat, and then hopefully they could make a movie together and get together again in the future, because I really miss the man, you know. So either way, that's my thoughts on Mission Impossible 2, guys. Definitely a weird movie, you know, in the franchise, you know, but let's move on to Mission Impossible 3, shall we? Now, this one is a comeback to the franchise, you know, and I think a lot of people are looking back to this movie thanking Mission Impossible 3, you know, because this movie saved the Mission Impossible franchise, you know, because the second one really fumbled the bag, but the third one managed to found its footing again. And this movie is directed by Jjabrams, you know, and I think this is like his directorial debut, you know. So for the third one, we follow Ethan Hunt again, you know, but this time they really humanize Ethan Hunt, you know, because he has a wife, you know, played by Michelle Monaghan, you know, and named Julia, you know. And at this point, he was signed to do a mission, you know, to get the rabbit's foot, you know. And yeah, I think in this movie, they're really trying to bring back the formula from the first Mission Impossible movie and try to fix everything that the second movie ruined, you know, including bringing back the real Ethan Hunt's character, you know, humanize him, and then preparing, you know, basically preparing an engaging story, you know, because in the second movie, the story and the pacing was all over the place, you know. I barely remember what happened even rewatching it. I'm just like, okay, well, I just have no interest, man. You know, it's just so bad, you know. But the third movie, I think, has an interesting story, you know, and has some stakes in the story itself, you know. Especially now Ethan has a wife, you know. But basically, in this movie, he basically was hired by John Musgrave, played by Billy Crudup, you know. He's basically the IMF directors, you know, and he recruits Ethan to find Agent Lindsay Ferris, you know, and Agent Ferris here are basically trained by Ethan, you know, and obviously Ethan decided to rescue Agent Ferris, you know, but unfortunately Agent Ferris still dies, you know, because there is a bomb on her skull, you know, and planted by well, I would say the best villain in the Mission Impossible franchise, played by Philip Seymour Hoffman, you know, which is, again, rest in peace, Philip Seymour Hoffman. You know, he's a great actor, and he is the best villain in the franchise, in my opinion. I know some people might disagree, but I think Philip Seymour Hoffman is Owen Davian, that's his character's name, is the scariest villain and a chilling villain in the Mission Impossible franchise, you know, and nothing will top him, you know. Not even Henry Cavill. I love Henry Cavill, but I think Philip Seymour Hoffman is still, in my opinion, the better villain in the franchise. You know, he was so chilling, man. And yeah, the opening sequence in this movie, the opening scene is in this movie, it's not exactly a badass opening sequence, but no, it's actually a really scary sequence with Ethan Hunt and Owen's character, Philip Seymour Hoffman character Owen, and then his wife Julia, you know, and he basically threatened to kill Julia until he finds tell him where the the rabbit's foot was. Yeah, that's what it's called. Basically, the rabbit's foot is like the the MacGuffin of the movie itself. You know, they didn't really tell you what the rabbit foot was, you know, but it's gonna come back in Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, you know. But I'm assuming it's gonna be related to the entity in some way, you know, which I'm gonna get to that later, you know. But either way, you know, after he failed to save Agent Harris, you know, Ethan decided to go into a mission, you know, because Agent Harris basically said that he found some maybe some mole in the IMF department, you know, and then he also found some information about Owen Davian, you know. So he decided to finish the mission for Agent Ferris, essentially, you know. And then we see some Ethan decided to recreate the scene again from the first Mission Impossible, you know, with the rope, which I think is also, yeah, I mean, it's better than the second one, because in the second one they jump off the building, and I think it's just so bad the way it looks, you know. So in this one they kind of like brought back to some reality again, which I really like the scene a lot, you know. Even though it's not as impressive as the first one, but I do think it does the job, you know, as a homage to the first one, you know. But yeah, he decided to kidnap Owen Davian, you know, in the Vatican City, you know, and then to ask obviously where the rabbit's foot was, you know. And at the time, Owen doesn't necessarily tell anything about it, you know. But again, Philip Seymour Hoffman performance in the scene is also amazing, you know, because like he said that, oh, you know, you have a wife, you have a girlfriend, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna find her, and I'm gonna hurt her. I'm gonna kill her. I'm gonna kill her right in front of you, and you're gonna beg for mercy, you know. And even when Ethan was like screaming and asking where the rabbit foot was, you know, Owen doesn't listen. He just like kept threatening Ethan, you know, asking for who his name was, you know, and threatening to kill his loved one, you know. Like he was so unfazed by this whole capture thing by the IMF, you know. Like he doesn't care, because like again, after he decided. He was being delivered to like the IMF headquarters, you know, his team attacks the convoy, which I think is also becomes another great action sequence, you know, where you know, Ethan tried to recapture Owen again, you know, but unfortunately he managed to get away, you know, and because now Owen know who Ethan was, you know, he decided to kidnap Ethan's wife Julia, you know, in the hospital, and Ethan becomes like the main suspect, I guess, you know, on this mission, you know, and this is where he decided to go rogue, you know, which I think in the second Mission Impossible movie is, I think it's the only Mission Impossible movie where Ethan Hunt doesn't go rogue, you know, in the second movie, but in this one he does go rogue again, which has become the staple franchise, you know. And also I forgot to mention Lawrence Fishburne is in this movie, you know. I think he is he's playing Theodore Brasolino, which is the IMF directors, you know. And then of course we cannot forget Simon Pegg as well as Benjamin Benji Dunn, the very first appearance of Benji in the scene, you know. And when I first watched this movie, I was surprised at how little screen time that Simon Pegg got in this movie, you know, because I'm always assuming that, oh, Benji's gonna be the big character starting from Mission Impossible 3, right? You know, but no, like Benji's a minor character in this movie, you know, and that's not until Ghost Protocol where he becomes like a big character, you know, which I'm glad, you know, because I think Benji is such a fun character, you know, and I think this is a great introduction to his characters, you know. But either way, the reason why I want to make some theory about the rabbit's foot as well, you know, about how it connected to the entity, you know, because like Benji in this movie, he has a theory about like some technology that might destroy everything, you know, in a way, which I think is a theory from his like university professor in a way, you know. He kind of mentions something like that, you know, similar. It's about technology that could destroy every single thing, you know. And again, he does said it's only a theory because at the end of the day, nobody knows what the rabbit foot was, you know. But I do think that the rabbit foot is gonna become like maybe the basis of the entity in the Final Reckoning, you know, or maybe the entity, or maybe it's gonna be like an entirely different thing, you know, where the entity has to get that item, you know, because we see that Ethan in the trailer from the Final Reckoning where he does grab the rabbit's foot, you know, which we're gonna see that what the rabbit foot actually was in the Final Reckoning, you know. But I think from Benji's theory in this movie, it seems like it might be related to technology, so it might be related to the entity in some way, you know. Maybe it's like the basis programming from the entity, in my opinion, you know. So either way, after that theory, I would say I really love the sequence in Shanghai, you know, where Ethan Hunt basically tried to get this rabbit foot, you know, because obviously his wife Julia got kidnapped, you know, so Owen gave him 48 hours to deliver the rabbit foot, you know, in exchange for Julia's life, you know. So Ethan decided to make a plan, you know, in Shanghai, where we basically jump off a building, which I think a really cool stunt by Tom Cruise again, you know. And there is also a scene, you know, where he jumps off the building and then he land on the street, you know, and then there is a car stopped right next to him, which I think is a really really insane, you know, insane stunt as well. You know, it's like, man, Tom Cruise is amazing, man. I love him so much, you know. Like all these amazing stunts is absolutely fantastic, you know. But anyway, he gets the rabbit's foot, you know, so he decided to deliver that to Owen, you know, and then where he gets to the location in, I think in China. Once in China, you know, we get to see a reveal where Billy Crudup's character John was actually the traitor in the IMF team, you know, and he basically left this false clue to Agent Faris, you know, believing that Brassel, Lawrence Fishburne character, is the mole in IMF, you know, but turns out that no, he was actually working with Owen, you know, and I think, or I guess Owen working for John here, you know, and he said that, well, just tell us what the rabbit first was, you know, so we can actually, so again, your wife doesn't, so Ethan's wife can live, you know, but Ethan decided to run away, you know, he free himself, you know, and then uses, you know, John's phone to obtain Julia's location. This scene becomes like a classic scene, you know, where Benji is like helping Ethan, you know, through the radio, to the communication, you know, because like, I think every single like the sequel of Mission Impossible have that scene, you know, where Benji is like guiding Ethan, you know, to where the next location was, you know, and then the very first scene happened in Mission Impossible 3, and I think it's absolutely fantastic how far the franchise has gone, you know, and how far the relationship between Ethan and Benji does, you know, because like this is the start of their relationship, you know, where basically Ethan owns Benji here, you know, because Benji decided to help him, even though that Ethan was labeled as a traitor, I guess, you know. But yeah, you know, after this scene, you know, where we get to see some amazing run from Tom Cruise, you know, Tom Cruise run is obviously one of the most iconic scene ever, you know. Nothing Mission Impossible 3 has the best running scene, you know, from the original trilogy, in my opinion, you know. There is this long shot where Ethan just like running through the crowds, you know, and it holds on for like, I think, a couple of seconds, I think, which I think is really really fantastic, and how intense the entire situation was, you know, because he's trying to save his wife, you know, and then of course Tom Cruise running, man, is absolutely fantastic, you know, the way it was shot, you know, and it's just, man, it was such a great continuous running shot, you know, it's absolutely amazing, you know. But after Ethan gets to the location, you know, he has a fight with Owen, you know, and then he manages to kill Owen, you know, but it was revealed that Ethan actually has a bomb in his skull, you know, kind of similar to Agent Faris, you know, where she has a bomb in her skull that eventually kill him, you know. But this time Ethan decided to basically I think shock himself, you know, where he temporarily dies, you know. But since Julia was a nurse, then Julia was able to bring him back, you know. But before Julia kills, I think, 2 guys, you know, which I think is pretty badass, you know, for him, you know, like pretty capable for her to kill, including John, you know, which is Billy Crudup's character, was killed by Julia, which I think, wow, did not see that coming, but great, you know, good riddance, right? It was a good scene, you know, where Julia actually has one scene where she tries to protect her her husband in a way, and decided to kill 2 guys, you know, which, like, wow, that was pretty badass in my opinion, you know. But anyway, she managed to resurrect Ethan, you know, and then Ethan finally explains that his, you know, IMF career to her, you know, and eventually back in the US, you know, Brassel and the other comrades decide to congratulate Ethan, you know, and then he lives for his honeymoon with Julia, you know, which I think is a really really great ending, you know. And honestly, looking at this ending, guys, this could have been a great ending to a Mission Impossible trilogy, you know. I mean, again, it's not gonna be a great trilogy, you know, but I think this could have been a solid ending to Ethan Hunt's character, you know. But I'm really glad that it was, you know, and then the franchise still continues to this very day, you know. But I feel like watching Mission Impossible 3, it does feels like the end of a trilogy before Ghost Protocol decided to you know, continue the storyline, sure, but it feels like a soft reboot, I think, in my opinion, you know, even though it was a continuation from the 3rd movie in a way, you know. But it feels like it's a very different Mission Impossible movie, you know, because Ghost Protocol is basically where the Mission Impossible movie becomes really really consistent with itself, you know, and Tom Cruise decided to do his own crazy stunt again, you know, even more crazier than before, you know. And yeah, that's where the franchise become much more consistent, and that's why I don't exactly want to review them, you know, because, like, well, I'm pretty much just saying the same shit, you know. But I feel like for the trilogy, this is an interesting review for me to look back how different the Mission Impossible franchise was, you know, and how much they fumble in the 2nd movie, but managed to bring back in the 3rd movie, which I think is a really really solid, you know. I think maybe my only criticism about this movie is that the movie never managed to stop and take a breather sometimes, where things just keep going and keep happening, and I'm saying, okay, Jesus, like, I think it's okay movies for you to slow down a bit, because I feel like they just saw how slow Mission Impossible 2 was, until like the very end where all the action happening, and then decided, and then they decide for the third movie, it's like, oh yeah, let's just go with the action, like continuously for the third movie, But even then, it's like, yeah, it's a minor nitpick, at the end of the day, I still think the action sequence are great, the mission sequence are great, I love it a lot, and it's nice also see vingrhames again. I think he's a very consistent characters in the Mission Impossible franchise, and like, yeah, it's absolutely amazing, So yeah, guys, that's my review for Mission Impossible Trilogy, So get into the ranking of the movie, I would say from the lowest one, will be obviously Mission Impossible 2, because that movie is like the weirdest Mission Impossible movie. It doesn't feel like a Mission Impossible movie, and Ethan Hunt is not Ethan Hunt, he's James Bond, and the action sequences are way too ridiculous for his own good, because it is John Woo's style, but I feel like his style doesn't fit the Mission Impossible movie, man, and it clearly shows, And the second place I would say is Mission Impossible 3, because I think this is like a good comeback for the franchise and really save the franchise, because Mission Impossible 3 make less money than Mission Impossible 2, but the positive reception basically convinced Paramount Picture to make another one, which I'm really glad they make another one, because Mission Impossible now becomes like one of the most famous franchise for Tom Cruise, and it's not hard to see why, and all that thanks to Mission Impossible 3 for fixing the problem that Mission Impossible 2 had, which I really love that, and of course the first rank is obviously the first Mission Impossible movie, it's a start of the great franchise, I still rewatch it to this very day, and I still love it, I think it holds up really well, except maybe the internet aspect of it, because I think the internet aspect is like the weakest one, but either way, the rest of the movie I think that holds up really well, I love the characters, it's a great introduction to Tom Cruise character, Ethan Hunt, it gives us one of the most iconic sequences where Ethan basically dangling from the ropes, and every single Mission Impossible movie decided to recreate that, which I absolutely love that, and yeah, I think it's also one of the Mission Impossible movie where they still reference that even in the future Mission Impossible movie, even from Fallout to Dead Reckoning, they keep coming back to recreate some scenes or like do a callback to the very first Mission Impossible movie, which I did not get to, which I think the rest of the sequel Mission Impossible 2 or 3, they just like they don't really do any callbacks to them, I guess maybe like Benji guiding Ethan across the city, where we basically get the classic Tom Cruise from, like I think we does get that with Benji and Ethan, because obviously Benji's character was introduced in Mission Impossible 3, and it becomes like the basis for their friendship, which I absolutely love that, but I think the first movie has a way more iconic scenes, and I think it has way more dialogue and camera shot, especially like the Dutch angle shot, by briandepalma, and then even Christopher McQuarrie decided to recreate that from Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, where they're bringing back, Kid Rich, which I think makes sense. So yeah, that's why I think the first movie has a lot more impact than the rest of the, the other two movies essentially, but so that's why that's the first one for me, Either way, guys, that's my review for Mission Impossible Trilogy, my thoughts on how the franchise evolved, alongside with Ethan Hunt's character, and of course my ranking, So guys, let me know in the comment section below, what is your favorite Mission Impossible franchise, and what is your favorite movie in the first 3 Mission Impossible movie, because again, like I said, Ghost Protocol to the Final Reckoning is where the franchise basically finding its voice, but what about the first 3 movies? Because which one is your favorite movie in the trilogy, and which one is your least favorite, and if you guys don't mind, you guys can tell me why. I think I have fair assumption it's gonna be Mission Impossible 2, but yeah, feel free to share your opinion why it was bad. Maybe you have a different opinions that I haven't heard. But yeah, are you guys looking for the Final Reckoning, which supposedly be the final Mission Impossible movie? I know there is a news where apparently there's gonna be more Mission Impossible after the Final Reckoning, but it seems like with the promotion and the title, it seems like it's gonna be the final one. So I guess we'll see, man. I guess we'll see about that in 2 weeks, but either way, Let me know your opinions, guys, in the comment section below, and your mission, if you choose to accept it, is to leave a like and subscribe to this channel. And again, I hope you guys enjoy this review, guys. It's been fun to do like a retrospective review from the Mission Impossible franchise. It's an amazing franchise, so hopefully you guys enjoy this video. Stay tuned for the Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning reviews. Again, I hope you guys enjoy this video, and I will see you guys in the next one then. Bye.